Section 8. Preparedness. To be prepared is simply to be as ready as reasonably possible for expected events. Expected events could be categorized between likely and unlikely, or common and extremely rare. There are two types of events I'll discuss in the context of living off the grid: crises and catastrophes. I believe that being off the grid prepares you to better survive and better cope with crises and catastrophes. This is because, often during crises or catastrophes, that normal utility services and food supplies may be severely disrupted or even stopped, temporarily or indefinitely. Although living off the grid is not a guarantee to having all that you need during these events, it is likely to help you have powerful defenses against an event's harmful effects. Since each event brings different effects and challenges, I will discuss each expected event as to the challenges they may bring, and I'll explain how off-grid living may help. Crisis preparedness. Crises are expected and unexpected detrimental events that bring partial disruptions to existing working systems and services, such as food, transportation, water service, electric service, etc. Crisis may cause a short or long-term disruption to these, or even incapacitate the system, or severely dismantle it. The system may slow down or halt, even if it remains mostly physically intact. This can occur due to a variety of factors that may block or limit its normal operation. These factors may be one or a combination of many, like unemployment, underemployment, and low liquidity. Low liquidity is the scarce access to money due to overinflation, scarcity of goods, and more. Crises discussed here will include human cost, such as financial, social, climate, and political crises. And naturally occurring crises, storms, floods, earthquakes, etc. Human cost crises. Financial crises. Financial crises, in the context of living off the grid, come from the cyclic temporary ups and downs of an area's overall economy. Sometimes these down cycles may be severe enough and trigger a crisis. Financial or economic crises may affect water, food, shelter, and other goods and services, especially when unemployment and the scarcity of money impact those industries. In turn, there may be scarcity in the goods and services available to you. At the same time, you may be impacted by unemployment or lack of money, and you may temporarily lose access to those goods and services. In my lifetime, here in the US, I've lived through a few major financial crises, but there have been many throughout history, some of which have been severe. Some have been extremely severe, which have expanded worldwide. The most infamous of all is, perhaps, the Great Depression of 1929, whose effects lasted about 10 years, and many argued ushered conditions for World War. During that time, the US stock market crashed, and unemployment reached 20% at its peak. Its economic effects spread throughout the world. Other large economic crises include the early 1980s recession, savings and loan crisis of 1986, the special period in Cuba in 1991, the Russian financial crisis of 1998, and the Argentine Great Depression of 1998. In the US, I recall hearing about the dot-com bubble of 2000, and living through the Great Recession of 2007 to 2008. During this recession, there was widespread unemployment, peaking at 11%. And there were especially deep losses in financial and property assets. I, along with millions of others, were affected by the home mortgage crisis which accompanied the recession. Recently, Venezuela has gone through a deep economic crisis since 2012. And the world entered into a recession of varying severity since the beginning of the 2019 pandemic. As I write this, here in the US, the post-pandemic economic crisis remains for most Americans, with severe inflation in many critical markets like food, fuel, transportation, and many others. Needless to say, Financial crises are not just graphs and numbers on a screen somewhere with no effect, they are materially harmful to people living in our money-dependent society. A financial crisis may slow or stop your employment and monetary income, may diminish your investment or retirement account balances, may make food and utility prices too high for you to afford, and more. Some financial crises have caused the stress and suffering of millions of people, and have even contributed to the death of many, for extended periods. Living off the grid empowers you to be less dependent on your local, national, and international monetary economy. Although you may not choose to completely exit this economy, living off the grid provides a buffer zone between the economy and you, so that in case of a crisis the effects are dampened. For example, if you are debt-free and rely on only a small income because you don't have any bills, then a financial crisis that affects employment may affect you minimally. In contrast, someone with much debt, living a high-cost lifestyle, may lose many of their indebted property. In many cases, people may lose a home, a vehicle, access to food, healthcare, etc. For example, during the 2007 to 2008 Great Recession, I lost my home due to a combination of low local immigrant wages and over 50% loss of home value. And my lender, the bank, did not want to renegotiate the extremely bloated mortgage loan. This is despite my many pleas by phone and in writing. And this is after the federal bailout that banks receive. Then, many had a big mortgage loan, a precarious income, and not enough income. To no surprise, immigrant and black communities were hit the hardest. For example, when I lost my income in 2006, I had to move away from the area, mainly due to low prospects of fair wages and employment, and eventually abandoned my home. A tangible example of how living off-grid provides a buffer during a financial crisis is having solar energy equipment. It may get rid of your electric bill, allow you to allocate more funds for savings, and allow you to need less money. Another example is living efficiently. Living off-grid encourages you to increasingly live within your means, better manage your finances, save more, and pay less for everyday items. And the increased efficiency, skill, and knowledge of off-gridders surely contributes to their resiliency to financial crises. Also, as mentioned elsewhere, by becoming more ingenious, resourceful, and skilled, you become a more valuable employee, business administrator, or contributor in just about any place or situation. I believe producing food off the grid helps you financially. This is in various degrees, depending on your food producing capacity. It surely would help in the event of food shortages or food price runaway inflation, such as the current one. Just recently, the prices of hen eggs were a runaway, and those who had egg-laying hens were at an obvious economic advantage. During that time, in some areas the prices of eggs almost tripled within a short period, and prices remained about 60% above average for several weeks nationwide. During this time, many neighbors in my area suddenly sold chicken eggs from their backyards. Harnessing drinking water can surely help during economic crises, especially where water may become scarce. As you may know, bottled water is increasingly popular, with many people opting to consume mostly bottled water during their day. Economic crisis may impact delivery of water to supermarkets and other stores, and impact access to that need dearly. Harnessing, processing, and storing water are central pieces of living off the grid, and these can provide weeks to months of clean water supply. This water supply can help you remain healthy, even if a severe economic crisis hits, impacting drinking water availability. Economic crises may impact electrical power and other utility services like natural gas. These may be brownouts, short temporary electricity outages, blackouts, long-term electricity outages, and utility gas outages. These may be offset or alleviated by off-grid technologies like alternative energy systems, solar, wind, generators, and storage systems such as batteries and liquid propane gas tanks. You may use renewable generators, solar or wind, to refill your storage batteries and keep some or all of your electrical appliances and devices running during brownouts or blackouts. You may be completely off the electric or gas grid when your community experiences brownouts or blackouts, hardly noticing the occurrence. In short, an efficient lifestyle, expanded self-sufficiency skills and knowledge, and off-grid technologies will surely help you alleviate, or even ward off, the negative impacts of a financial crisis. And I believe this is a great reason to want to be off the grid. Social crises. Social crises may take many forms, and do happen quite often in modern society. Dissatisfaction with governments, laws, the economy, or social restrictions may trigger people to stop working and take to the streets in protest or riots. Protests are peaceful, while riots are more disrupting and sometimes violent. During protests and riots, there may be physical and violent clashes among opposing groups, like different factions of civilians or between factions and police. During social crises, the normal productive and distribution routines of society may slow down or stop. This may mean shortages of goods and services, and disruptions of work which may postpone or stop monetary income. A notable and recent social crisis occurred during the summer of 2020, the Black Lives Matter (BLM) protests. During this time, millions of people across many areas took to the streets to demand change to a world system that systematically and routinely discriminates against and denies justice for peoples of African descent. This crisis was triggered by the murder of the American citizen, George Floyd. Unfortunately, many local, state, and federal authorities responded violently to these protests, and many public clashes, violence, and destruction occurred. And, combined with the effects of the ongoing pandemic, the social effects of the protests were surely augmented. Further back, in 1980, the African American communities of Miami, Florida, erupted in protests and riots after Arthur McDuffie. McDuffie was an unarmed motorist who was brutally beaten and killed by 4 police officers. The officers involved were eventually charged. The controversial trial was moved from Miami to Tampa, an unusual move believed to be racially motivated, done for the benefit of the officers. Ultimately, all 4 of the accused officers were acquitted of any charges. Personally, so far, I have lived through a few social crises here in the US. In 1992, the Los Angeles riots were triggered by the brutal beating of Rodney King. The brutal attack was seen as unjustified and was videotaped, causing outrage, largely in the black communities of this racist nation. The subsequent acquittal of all officers involved in the blatant abuse caused social unrest and protests in many areas of the U.S. Some were reported as riots. In the spring of 2000, in South Florida, there was a short-term public crisis during the Elian Gonzalez custody dispute. During this time, outrage erupted in the Cuban-American communities of South Florida, caused by the dispute over the custody and forcible seizure of the toddler Cuban boy whose mother had drowned while migrating to the U.S. in 1999. Although there were threats of widespread turmoil in the streets, in the aftermath of the dramatic raid to seize the child, the threats did not materialize and tensions waned within days. There have been many riots in America, mostly driven by racism and discrimination based on protected statuses. Just to name a few, the Cairo, Illinois race riots of 1967 to 1973, the Martin Luther King assassination protests, and many others happened all across the world. During many of these crises, and many others not listed here, businesses were closed, property was damaged, fires erupted, traffic was stopped, people were jailed, and some were injured or killed. These crises can affect entire nations, regions, communities, or specific groups to various degrees. For example, if your business or home is set ablaze, or if you are jailed and lose your job during a protest or riot, will surely impact your physical and financial situation. More importantly, access to basics such as water, food and shelter may be affected during or in the aftermath of a social crisis. Living off the grid largely isolates you from the effects of social crisis, mainly by allowing you to remain away from the crisis and being prepared for it in many ways. For example, off-gridders will likely choose to live away from overcrowded areas, produce a significant portion of their food, and have water and long shelf-life food stored. Due to this preparedness, off-gridders may be able to wait out a social crisis by remaining in their home for however long the crisis occurs. Also, if you have little or no debt, bills, or financial commitments, then you may be able to cope with less or no income for the duration of a social crisis. And, if the social crisis affects utility services like water, gas, and electricity, you may be able to cope with this by relying on your own services off the grid. The normal methods of communications, like landlines or cellular telephone, may be disrupted during severe social crises. Fires or vandalism may cause damage to telephone and cellular infrastructure and knock out these services. If you are off the grid for communications, your service should not depend on any physical infrastructure outside of your home or yard. So, unless your home has been affected directly by the social crisis, you may be able to communicate using various wireless end-to-end equipment. More on this later. Political crises. Our world maintains much of its order and peace through government. Most nations have agreed that government is beneficial and necessary for a variety of reasons. But, governments gradually, or suddenly, become corrupt, despotic, authoritarian and abusive. The government may also weaken, to where other institutions control much of that society. Cartels and powerful families may hold more power than the government in certain areas or nations. In less democratic societies, suddenly, there may be a power struggle within the government. When any of these detrimental situations arise with the government, a political crisis may occur. Political crises may include widespread dissatisfaction and unrest, protests, riots, labor strikes, and street violence. Even in free and democratic societies, political crises may be triggered by outraged voters, especially if instigated by demagogue leaders, and real or perceived fraud during or after elections. This crisis occurred in the U.S. on January 6 of 2021 in Washington, D.C. More on this later. Also, martial law may trigger a political crisis. Martial law is when the government and authorities require strict curfews and other restrictions. This has occurred in specific areas, generally comprised of large minority groups, and has been contemplated nationwide several times in history. Again, martial law has been enforced, for short periods, in several instances. The effects of political crises may bring social and utility services shortages or stoppages. Water, food, healthcare, education, and utility services may slow down or halt completely. Businesses may close or be damaged, affecting the income of many. Government offices may slow down or halt services, and things like government-run utilities, water, energy, gas, may be severely affected. The government may even close, due to budget and staffing problems. For example, local governments may not have enough funds or credit to keep city services running normally, and may even stop vital services like water. Often, the first services to be affected are the ones that help the poorest and most vulnerable people, such as food aid and employment compensations. For example, the Georgia, USA, unemployment and food aid offices closed for several months during the thick of the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. And payments and benefits were severely disrupted for tens of thousands of needy families in the state. All state aid offices were shut, and I recall being unable to reach the unemployment office by phone. I experienced this after applying for unemployment benefits, after I was fired from an employer in the fall of 2020. Later, about 6 months after applying, I received a rejection letter filled with errors and untrue statements, proving to me the uselessness of this state agency. A recent political crisis, with potential national implications, was the insurrection of January 6, 2021. Here, a mob of thousands of dissatisfied and violent political fanatics stormed the U.S. Capitol and used violent attacks to try to disrupt and stop the congressional certification of the newly elected opposition president. Order was luckily restored, arguably because the mob was not large enough, and a last-minute call from the loser president to go home. I believe, had the mob had their way, there would be a despotic installed president as I write this. Other dire political crises have occurred around the world. Recently, a political crisis in Sudan has contributed to the displacement of millions of people in that nation. Syria and Somalia continue to suffer from decades of political and humanitarian crises, with tens of millions of people affected. The nation of Myanmar has seen political and humanitarian crises develop into violence in recent years, affecting over 10 million people and directly displacing over 200,000. Political instability and violence have affected many areas of Nigeria. There, currently, about 1 million people live in inaccessible and conflict-affected areas. At times, political crises have fallen into all-out war and ushered modern-day famines, such as the one in Yemen. There, over 20 million people are in dire need as I write this. Furthermore, countless short-term political crises have occurred throughout the world, and will continue to occur, perhaps often and for the foreseeable future, affecting the needs and lives of many people. Living off the grid has clear benefits in preventing and alleviating the ill effects of political crises. There's many ways in which a political crisis may affect people. But, we can all agree that political crises may bring scarcity, shortages, or stoppages of public and private goods and services. And, obviously, if you depend less on those public or private goods and services, you will be less affected if and when they slow down or stop. For example, a political crisis may affect your income by disrupting your ability to work or by shutting down your place of work. Or, if the government stops, this may stop your income if you are a government employee, or if you supply a good or service to the government. In summary, when you don't have debt, bills, or excessive costs of living, you may weather a political crisis much better. Additionally, living an efficient lifestyle lengthens the time you may live without the goods and services from the outside world. Your ability to remain isolated from the outside world and extend that isolation period by generating and utilizing off-grid goods and services are the off-grid abilities that may help you weather a political crisis. And you may help others do the same by allowing them to use your off-grid goods and services or by sharing your methods and technology.